This is Isabella Soto, a toddler who has swallowed a bottom battery and her life is in danger. And we all love to mock the EU for regulating everything, but the EU has actually created a label that aspires to prevent these sort of incidents from happening. And it's the CE label. And it's also the reason why your kids' toys don't have lead-based paint and the phone chargers don't catch fire, or at least that's what the label is trying to prevent. But the CE label was built for the analog world, and we're now living in a digital world where our vacuum cleaners and fridges and everything around us is actually connecting to the internet, which opens a new category of risks, the cyber risks. So related to this, the EU has created a new legislation called the Cyber Resilience Act, or the CRA, which is the digital version of the CE label. And in this podcast, we will be dissecting the CRA together with my colleague Lara. Oh, by the way, the girl from the picture actually made a full recovery, so you don't have to worry about it. My name is Aram, and I have been in application security for more than the past 15 years, first as a researcher, then as an industry expert, and lately as part of the OWASP-SAM project.
Hey everyone, Lara Brito. I'm a tech lawyer and legal researcher, working closely with the CRA since it was a proposal.
Lara, I have the first question for you, which is just from our own perspective. Codific is a company building products and solutions. And the question is broad, why do we really have to care about the CRA? We say our products are secure, so aren't we good enough? Isn't that good enough?
If your products are secure, then good for you already. Then it's easier to comply. But basically what the CRA tries to do with the EU is set a ground level, so a base level for cybersecurity, because now we know everything is interconnected. For you to follow security practices, best practices, you can rely on the goodness of your heart, as you did for so long, or following what you believe it's morally correct with your customers, with your colleagues, with other actors in the supply chain that depend on you. But then to make sure that everyone, independently of whether they care about security or not, that they're covered by some level of protection, one of the ways of doing that is turning that into a law. And this is what happened with the CRA. To do that, you don't just set an obligation. You tell everyone what happens if you don't comply, right? And you give them a, let's call it punishment, for non-compliance with the CRA of 15 million euros or 2.5% of your global turnover, which can be a lot of money, whichever is higher of the two. Products have been around for a long time. People have been selling and buying things for centuries. So you have a very well-established product security. The case law, the legislation, the fines, the authorities, everything is very well set. And now these same authorities, these same regimes, they will be working with cybersecurity. When you put a CE marking in your product, you're saying, I comply with everything that the common European market requires. And now that includes cybersecurity. So as you said, if you're already secure, then amazing, then you can already put it.
No, that was just a figure of speech.
I know. But we'll talk about that later.
Just because we're talking about safety, is it the case that we only care about security in the context of the CRA if it leads to a safety issue? And safety, by the way, for people who are not familiar, the difference between safety and security. Safety is something that can harm you physically. Security is sort of more cyber. So in the context of CRA, are we talking about issues where security can lead to a safety issue? So the fridge catches fire because some hackers put it on fire and then my house burns down where I am in the house. Or it's also related to a potential vulnerabilities where you can't really see anything, but then the fridge is part of a botnet, for instance.
But when we're talking about safety here, it's not just physical damage. Legally, when we talk about damage is what causes you harm. And harm can have many faces. You can suffer financial harm. You can suffer intellectual harm. You can suffer, when I say financial, any kind of property harm, data leaks, all of these things, they can constitute harm to different degrees. Physical injury is way higher up on the list than financial harm. But safety is not just physical.
So actually, a data leak about what am I eating, if I have a smart fridge and it knows what I eat, is still a harm. Or it joins a botnet, it's using more electricity, it costs me, 5 cents more per month, it's still considered an issue. doesn't
It can
have to
cause
kill.
harm. Yeah.
Yeah. This reminds me of the same sort of story where everybody was panicking some years ago because of this new privacy regulation called the GDPR. At the time, I was a researcher at the University of Leuven working on a privacy threat modeling methodology. And we were hoping like, okay, now our methodology here is going to be this amazing holy grail. Everyone can use it to make their products more privacy friendly. But that turned out to be completely not the case. So the whole GDPR was boiling down to lawyers writing policies and making users accept them and putting things in fine print. So it was a legal effort. And the question here is there anything that hints towards CRA becoming the same sort of thing? So is there a way that the lawyer can just put it in a privacy statement or a statement of use that I have to agree? And then from there on, it doesn't really matter what the actual level of security of the product is.
A good lawyer always helps, but here, what I hope the CRA does not become a GDPR. As you said, indeed, the GDPR became, to a large extent, lawyers' work, so a legal work. You write a lot of documentation. You don't necessarily, at least not to the extent that was intended, you don't have to be that private. The object that it's dealing with, it's so much more tangible than the GDPR, because the GDPR didn't create the definition of data protection, but it created the definition of personal data. But the CRA, what it does, the object is cybersecurity. It's the security of a system. You know what the system is, you know what the application, the code is, you know what the components are, you know what the IoT is. The CRA is not creating cybersecurity. Cybersecurity exists, the practices exist, the standards exist. You're just now bundling them into a set of obligations. Summary, the CRA cannot follow solely only into the legal domain.
You've mentioned several times, we know what security is. And actually, I'm not super sure that we do know. Well, I know what security is, but I'm not sure that it's sort of well accepted or well adopted in terms of what security is. That impression comes a little bit also from the text, where security by design is mentioned to be like the thing. And a security by design comes from the previous century, where we would write code. And then there is this saying that you can't patch your way out of a bad design. So you can't fix a design problem in the code. And back in the previous century, security wasn't really, really important. Security by design essentially means a holistic approach towards security across the whole software development lifecycle. So across every phase in the software development lifecycle, and design is just one of those phases. And of course, it is critical to have security in the design phase before you start coding. But then also security should go even further back to requirements, having security requirements in place. It should go back to training, organizational culture and awareness, corporate policies and standards, and so on. And then when we talk about security, I've started this episode somewhere. I said our product is secure, but having a product and calling it secure, it's a false statement, because it has to be secure against something. You have to have some specific threats and risks in mind. And here is a shocking statement. If there are no risks, there is no need for security. And then when we talk about risks and threats, I pulled in an analogy. Donald Rumsfeld said this back in 2012, I think. He was calling it the known knowns and the known unknowns and the unknown knowns. And he was actually mocked for this. But it's a great analogy because it draws the space of risks and threats. And what he meant by known knowns are the risks and threats that we understand, and we actually have controls for them in place. But then there are also the known unknowns, as he called them. These are the risks that exist, but we don't know them very well, or we haven't characterized them sufficiently enough. And to give you an example, AI threats. Don't think we have a very good clue, a very good idea what all these AI tools, what risks do they bring. We do know some of the risks already, but we don't know all the risks because we're still learning through that. Then there are the unknown unknowns, which are risks we don't know anything about. And a great example is if we go back in time 2 years ago, AI risks didn't exist, so we didn't know anything about it. And then finally, you have the unknown knowns. These are the risks that we know, but then we either chose to ignore them or we just buried them. And then there is a little bit of cycling around these type of categories. So And to do that systematically, we need the concepts of threat modeling and risk assessment. And we need to do this constantly because risks are changing, our threat landscape is changing, and we need to sort of move around all the time around these. We do have a next episode which will be focusing mainly on risks and threat assessments in the context of the CRA, but I just wanted to highlight the importance and sort of try to go towards the definition of security in the context of the CRA and what security means. But then the question I have now is, because CRA is talking about products with digital elements, okay, we need to make sure that they are secure. But then it becomes very much unclear for a technical person like me, what is a product with digital elements?
The CRA, as we were talking before, it wants to set a base level of security. How do you do that? You cover as many products as you can, because you know better than I do, way better than I do. If you have a weak link on a chain, the chain breaks on the weakest link. So if you want to increase the level of security broadly, you secure every device. So that's what the CRA aims to do. It says every product, every hardware, software that aims to either directly or indirectly, logically or physically, to be integrated into a network that is covered by the CRA. Even if it's not connected all of the time, it can be connected once to a network. If there's an intention to make this product connected to a network, it falls in the scope. In principle, SaaS doesn't fall in the scope, but they can fall in the scope. Even if not directly classified as products with digital elements, they can be classified as either components of a product or remote data processing solutions. This is another definition that the CRA presents. If you're developing an application and you're also or either developing or under your instruction, you have cloud server that the functioning of your product or of your application directly depends on this cloud server, this falls under scope. The cloud server falls under scope as well, even though it might be classified, some of these services might be classified as SaaS, as services, they fall under scope. Basically, we have these. You have a PDE, this is the product itself, the product hardware or software. You have the remote data processing solutions that you as a manufacturer have to take into account, and you have the components. You're also obliged, and this is going to be super important, we're going to talk about this in another episode about open source components. You are going to have to take these components into account on your risk assessment. You don't have to comply for them. They're components produced by a third party. You have an obligation to apply due diligence.
I'm going to try to recap that. It seems like almost everything is going to fall under the CRA, except for certain classes of pure SaaS with no products. But now I'm having a hard time coming up with that SaaS. Can you give an example of something exotic or not as exotic that doesn't have to comply?
An HDMI cable, maybe.
Oh, wow.
It's just connecting. I know this sounds like a joke, the HDMI cable, but it's everything is arguable. And this is where we enter the legal domain, because then you have to argue what is your product, what is the intended purpose of your product, the reasonable use of your product.
Is it the case that every product has to get the maximum level of security? I'm building a simple chess game and I cannot imagine how it can harm the users. I'm making this up, or a calculator. Are there different type of products in the CRA that get more higher bar versus lower bar for other products?
You talked about a good example. A calculator, the old ones, just the buttons, and it might not fall under scope if it's not connected to any network.
Ooh, we found one.
I found one. It's a digital thing that's not connected to anything else. All products with digital elements, they fall under scope, and they have in principle the same obligations. This is Annex 1, Part 1, technical requirements. We're going to talk more about them in a bit. But what the CRA does is, the more your product, the higher the level of dependency of other products, of the security of other products, the higher level of reliance on your product, the higher level of scrutiny you have. Not necessarily more obligations, The obligations are the same. The act doesn't judge. It's the same for everybody, the technical requirements. But the way you show compliance is different. And it makes a lot of sense. So if, for example, you are manufacturing a password manager, and I am manufacturing a calculator that every now and then I can connect to my computer, all the parties, all the actors, all the companies, they depend on my password manager to keep themselves secure, at least to some extent, at least part of their work. So it makes more sense that I have to write more, I have to work more to prove that I comply. Even though in principle, my obligations and the one and those of whoever produces the calculator that connects to the internet are the same, I have to prove it differently. It divides products into categories. The obligations are in principle the same, but the categories prove it differently. You have default products. This is almost 90%, at least the estimate, almost 90% of products. This is almost everyone is going to fall under this category. The Act defines important, which it divides in class 1 and class 2. Don't ask me why. I have no clue why it divides important class into 2. And then you have a third one, which is critical products. And they are organized, again, by level of dependency of other products to upkeep their security. If you read, I don't know if anyone listening to this will read, I hope you will, read the Annex 1 Part 1, because this is 1 page, a page and a half of obligations. You're not going to change your life with a page and a half. You're not going to change your way of building things with a page and a half. So you need more instructions. Because we don't want the act, the legislation, to be 500 pages long, you release standards connected to each of the obligations. And it's easier to update standards than it is to update a legislation. That's also why they're separate. The main obligations of the CRA, the main sets of obligations, it would make sense to have them standardized. That's why the Commission asked Sense and Alexid, please develop these standards. So let's go back to horizontal standards. So you have these 3 buckets of obligations. Okay, technical, organizational, and documental, and notification. So the Commission said, I'm not going to write everything down in the Act. I'm going to release standards. All the obligations are the same for all products. So it makes sense for me to have a horizontal standard. Horizontal is a thing that applies to everyone. Everyone can rely on it. And important note, for default products, if you use the standards, these horizontal standards, if you rely on them while you're designing your product, while you're building your product, you are presumed to conform with the Act if you relied on these standards, and you can have the CE marking. You self-declare, basically, you self-declare compliance. You say, I did what I had to do. Here's the CE marking. Here's my declaration of conformity. You publish that into the world so everyone can see that you comply. But then you do have to comply. I'm not saying you cannot just write it down and release the declaration and put the CE marking. If you're saying that you comply, you have to have the documents to prove that you comply, because you can get knocks at your door at any given time. For a critical product, you have these vertical standards. So, for example, for a firewall, I have to have clearer obligations, clearer requirements that I have to comply with.
It's probably more specific, geared towards a firewall, right? For instance.
So you have clearer requirements. You cannot. My way of complying, if I manufacture a firewall, cannot be the same as if I manufacture a mouse or a keyboard. This has to be different. For the horizontal standards, you have these technical requirements, that bucket. This is a list of obligations. And if you read it at first, if you're a developer, it might seem a bit scary because it's a lot of things. You're like, how do I comply with this? And this is what the standards are here for.
When is the CRA becoming enforced? And when does the game start?
Everything, the full Act, so Annex 1, Part 1, the technical obligations, they're going to become applicable from December 2027. So we have a bit over a year from here, almost a year and a half, which is, even that might not be enough time, I've heard.
If as a company you have nothing going on in terms of security, it's going to be really, really hard to get there on time.
Might become even more difficult, because even though the full Act only becomes applicable from December 27, the vulnerability handling, at least part of them, the notification obligations, they become applicable from September now. And these obligations, what do they mean? What does it say? Basically, from September, the Act it creates these two categories. You have an actively exploited vulnerability, and you have a severe incident on your product. From September, you're going to have to report on them to ENISA and to your national authority. Some of them have still not been chosen. They've not been published who these authorities will be. But at least ENISA, we know who ENISA is. And they are to release a portal, which is still not live, but through which you can report these incidents and vulnerabilities. But for you to be able to report a severe incident or an actively exploited vulnerability, you have to first be aware that you have an actively exploited vulnerability.
You need a lot going on. Essentially, you have to have a decent vulnerability management in place. Yeah, and I mean, you also have to be able. I guess you have to be able to solve them, right? So if you know something is going on, you can't just leave it like that. You have to fix the issue. I guess the last question that I would like to discuss here is what about products that are already on the market? I know there is some difference between a product that is already there today and the CRA becomes applicable. Are we supposed to do anything about that? Are we supposed to do the vulnerability reporting for those?
This is another thorny subject because that I don't think anyone would be too glad to hear. So from December 27, the Act becomes applicable. From that date onwards, let's say I placed a product, I sold a product, I placed this product on the market before that date, before December 27. So it's not on the scope of the Act. I don't have to, in principle, I don't have to comply with all the obligations, the technical ones. If after that date, I make the Act calls substantial modification to my product, then the product falls in the scope from the date of the change, after December 27. But the thing that we don't know is the threshold of what is a substantial and what is not a substantial modification. The Commission released the draft guidelines, but this is still unclear. Even though you might not have placed your market, so it doesn't fall fully on the scope, you're still obliged to report any actively exploited vulnerabilities and severe incidents. So that part of the Act. And with that, it's an anchor to all the other obligations.
If you're making HDMI cables, you're fine. But otherwise, I can also hardly imagine a product which is not going to change. And I do remember coming across a modification which doesn't seem substantial at all, which is adding the Remember Me option in the login screen. It is considered a substantial modification, although it's just a checkbox that says Remember Me for, 3 months, let's say. I guess we can start wrapping up and recapping what we've learned today. So the CRA is likely not to be another GDPR. You actually need security this time. And to get that security, it's something where you're going to need time to get the security phased into your SDLC. And unfortunately, we don't have much time. And then we've also talked about, in this episode, we've talked about what is applicable now. And for that end, together with Lara, we have developed a CRA screening tool, which you can use freely on the SAMI website, samicodific.com, to see if your product has to be compliant with CRA, so if CRA applies. And you can also use our SAMI tool to actually identify your actual gaps and then plan improvements. And in the next phases of the tool, we plan to add a functionality which will help you generate this compliance documentation that Lara was talking about, where we're going to zoom into throughout the next episodes. Our next episode is going to be about risk assessments and threat modeling, threat analysis. That is all for today. Thank you very much for listening.